She has been stealing from her own father for years. Remove her from the building. That was my mother-in-law's voice. Calm, rehearsed. And she said it while pointing directly at my wife, who was standing 3 feet away in a black dress she had worn to her father's funeral just 6 days earlier. My name is Carter Hayes. I'm 31 years old. I've handled pressure my entire career. Quarterly audits, hostile negotiations, clients who lied through their teeth while shaking my hand. I thought I knew what it looked like when someone was being cornered. I had no idea. My wife, Sophie, had spent the last 2 weeks barely sleeping. Her father passed after 18 months of heart failure, slow and grinding. She had driven to his care facility 3 times a week, managed his medications, coordinated with his doctors, and held his hand every single night in his final week. She loved him completely and quietly, the way she does everything. She did not perform grief, she just carried it. So when we walked into that estate attorney's conference room on a Tuesday morning, she was already hollowed out. She was there to hear her father's final wishes, not to defend herself. She had no reason to think she needed to. The attorney, a man named Pruitt, had barely finished reading the first paragraph of the will when my mother-in-law stood up, opened a leather folio, and slid a document across the table. Her son, Sophie's older brother, sat beside her with his arms crossed and his eyes on the floor. 2 other relatives sat along the wall. Nobody moved. Pruitt looked at the document. His face shifted. "This is a formal complaint," my mother-in-law said. "Filed with the Elder Financial Abuse Unit. Sophie has had access to her father's accounts for the past 2 years. During that time, over $200,000 moved in ways that cannot be explained. We have the statements. We have the transfer logs. And we have a separate amended will that her father signed 3 months ago, once he became aware of what she had been doing." Sophie turned to her slowly. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about theft," her mother said without flinching. "From a dying man. From your own father." 2 men appeared in the doorway. Building security. Pruitt had already called them, or someone had, before we even arrived. I realized then that this was not spontaneous. This was a production. Every prop was already in place. "Mrs. Hayes," Pruitt said carefully, "we're going to need you to step out while we review these documents." Sophie looked at me. Not panicked. Not even angry yet. Just stunned in the way you go stunned when reality stops making sense. I stood up. "She's not going anywhere until someone explains what documentation you actually have and who prepared it." "Sir, please," one of the security men said. "She is the primary beneficiary named in the will you were just reading," I said. "You don't remove a beneficiary from a legal proceeding based on a folder someone brought from home." Pruitt cleared his throat. "The amended will supersedes the previous document. Given the nature of the allegations, we are required to pause the reading." My mother-in-law looked at me with the particular expression of someone who had already won and wanted me to know it. Her son still wouldn't meet my eyes. Sophie touched my arm. "Let's go," she said quietly. We walked out together. The security men followed us to the elevator. My mother-in-law didn't say another word. She didn't have to. As the doors closed, I watched her sit back down in that conference room like she was settling in for a board meeting she had spent months preparing for. She had. I just didn't know how many months yet. In the parking garage, Sophie sat in the passenger seat and stared at the concrete wall in front of us. I didn't start the car. I just let her breathe. "She's been planning this," Sophie finally said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "The amended will? The elder abuse filing? The security?" She exhaled slowly. She had all of it ready. I nodded. "Which means she made mistakes. Nobody plans something this carefully without leaving a trail." Sophie looked at me. "Carter." "I know," I said. "Give me tonight." I had worked in forensic accounting for 6 years before moving into corporate consulting. My closest colleague during those years was a man named Marcus Webb, who had since moved to a private firm that specialized in financial fraud investigation. We had worked 14-hour days together on 3 separate federal cases. We had also been to each other's weddings. He knew Sophie. He knew her family by name, not because I gossiped, but because over 6 years you learn the contours of someone's life the same way you learn their handwriting. I called him from the parking garage before I started the engine. He picked up on the second ring. I told him everything in 4 minutes. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a short silence. "Send me whatever you have access to," he said. "Bank statements? Account logins Sophie authorized, transfer records, anything her father signed in the last 2 years. I need the timeline. Tonight, I'll order dinner to the office." That night, Sophie gave me every document she had. She had been meticulous, the way she is with everything. Receipts, communications with the care facility, email threads with her father's physicians, She had kept everything because she loved order, not because she anticipated needing to defend herself. We worked through the records until 2 in the morning. Marcus had access to tools, I didn't, and within the first hour, he had flagged something. The transfers my mother-in-law had documented in her complaint were real. Money had moved from Sophie's father's accounts. But when Marcus pulled the IP records attached to the online banking sessions, they didn't come from Sophie's devices. They came from 2 addresses. One resolved to a location in the same zip code as my brother-in-law's apartment. The other resolved to an IP that had been used to access Sophie's father's accounts repeatedly over 22 months, always between 11 at night and 2 in the morning, during windows when Sophie was demonstrably somewhere else. Marcus leaned back and looked at the screen. "The amended will," he said. "When was it notarized?" I checked the copy Pruitt had provided. November 14th. Marcus pulled up the care facility's visitor log, which Sophie had requested months ago for insurance documentation. He scrolled to November. Sophie had not visited her father on November 14th. She had been in Denver for a work conference. I had the hotel confirmation. I had her flight records. We had sent her father flowers with a card because she felt guilty about missing a visit. Marcus looked at me steadily. "She wasn't there," I said. "No. But someone was," he said. "And whoever got that will sign did it when Sophie couldn't have been present to contest it." I felt something go cold and sharp in my chest. Not rage. Focus. "Her father's nurse," I said. "He had a dedicated overnight nurse the last 4 months. Sophie mentioned she tried to contact her after he passed but never got a response." Marcus nodded slowly. "Find her. It took me 2 days. The nurse's name was Patricia, and she had left the care facility shortly after Sophie's father died. I found her through a licensing registry and drove 40 minutes to meet her at a diner she suggested. She was in her 50s, quiet, and she looked uncomfortable from the moment I sat down. I told her only what I needed to. That I wasn't there to create problems for her. That I only needed to know what she had witnessed." She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "He wanted to change it back," she said finally. "The will. He told me in October that he'd made a mistake. That he'd signed something he didn't fully understand, and he wanted to speak to a different attorney. One his daughter could recommend." "Did he?" She shook her head. "His son visited the night before the attorney was scheduled to come. I was asked to take my break early. When I came back, he seemed different. Quieter. He didn't bring up the attorney again. I asked her if she would be willing to write down what she had told me and sign it. She was quiet for a long time." "His daughter really didn't know?" she asked. "Sophie didn't know any of it," I said. Patricia reached across the table and took the pen I had placed there. What followed was not dramatic in the way that revenge stories are supposed to be. It was paperwork and phone calls and precise, exhausting coordination. I did not confront my mother-in-law in a parking lot. I did not send cryptic messages or make threats. I did exactly what she had done. I built a file. And then I put it in front of people she could not control. Marcus compiled a full forensic report. Patricia's written statement went to a probate litigation attorney Sophie retained within the week. We filed to contest the amended will on the grounds of undue influence and questioned the legitimacy of the notarization, which Marcus had flagged as potentially fraudulent. The notary's license had been suspended 2 months before the date on the document. The elder abuse complaint my mother-in-law had filed against Sophie was reviewed by investigators who, once they saw Marcus's IP analysis, began asking different questions. The direction of the inquiry shifted. It shifted toward the people who had actually initiated the transfers. I didn't tell my mother-in-law any of this was coming. But I did call her. I asked to meet. She suggested her house, which told me she still thought she was in control of the geography. I showed up on a Wednesday afternoon and sat across from her in the same living room where Sophie and I had spent a dozen holidays. Her son was there. He had positioned himself near the kitchen doorway like he was ready to leave quickly. She offered coffee. I declined. "I want to understand something," I said. "Was this always the plan, or did it develop?" She looked at me with the patience of someone who has rehearsed the wrong conversation. "Carter, I understand you're upset. But you have to see this from my perspective. Sophie had access to resources she wasn't entitled to, and her father was vulnerable. I was protecting the estate. From his own daughter. From someone who took advantage of a dying man." I nodded slowly and placed a folder on the coffee table. "I didn't open it. I just left it there. The IP logs from your son's apartment," I said, "show 47 separate login sessions to your father's accounts over 22 months. The transfers match those sessions exactly. The amended will was notarized by someone whose license was suspended before the notarization date. And Patricia, who was your father's overnight nurse, has provided a written statement that he explicitly requested to change the will back in October, and that your son visited the night before that meeting was scheduled. Her son made a small sound near the kitchen door. She didn't move. You built a very clean case against Sophie, I continued. But you built it on top of your own paper trail. Which means every document you filed is now evidence against you. She looked at the folder. Then at me. The DA's office received Marcus's report this morning, I said. The probate court has the notary issue under review, and the elder abuse unit has been contacted about the possibility that the original complaint was filed in bad faith as part of a larger scheme. She finally blinked. You can't prove intent. Marcus has been doing this for 11 years, I said. He found the shell account your son used to receive 2 of the transfers in 2023. It was opened 6 weeks after you both first retained that estate attorney. That's not a coincidence. That's intent. I stood up. Her son had already left the room. I heard the back door close. Sophie has not done anything wrong, I said. Not to her father. Not to this estate. Not to you, though I'm genuinely struggling to understand why that didn't matter to you. My mother-in-law looked up at me for the first time with something other than composure on her face. It wasn't guilt. It was the particular fear of someone who had believed they had planned for every outcome except the one currently happening. You have a daughter who adored her father, I said. And you made his last months a lie. I don't have anything else to say to you. I left the folder on the table and walked out. The next 3 weeks moved faster than I expected. My brother-in-law retained his own attorney, separate from his mother, which told me everything about what conversations were happening behind closed doors. His attorney made contact with the DA's office before any formal charges were filed. He was cooperating. The notary was identified. She was a woman his mother had known for 15 years, whose license had lapsed due to a paperwork error she hadn't yet resolved. She had notarized the document as a favor and apparently did not understand fully what she was participating in. She provided a statement. Her cooperation narrowed the exposure onto my mother-in-law considerably. The probate court voided the amended will. It did not do so quietly. Probate proceedings are public record, and the filed documents, including Marcus's forensic report and Patricia's statement, became part of that record. A local legal affairs reporter picked up the case summary 2 weeks after the ruling. He wrote a short piece about elder financial abuse cases where family members are wrongly accused while actual abuse goes undetected. He did not use Sophie's name. He used mine, with permission, for one quote. Forensic records don't lie, I told him. They just require someone willing to read them. Sophie read the article on her phone at the kitchen table and didn't say anything for a moment. You did all of this, she said finally. Marcus did most of the technical work. She set the phone down. Carter. She was not going to get away with it, I said. I was not going to sit across from you in that car and then come home and let it go. Sophie looked at me with the expression she has when she's feeling something she doesn't have words for yet. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. He would have hated this, she said. Her father. He didn't want anyone to fight. I know, I said. I didn't do it to fight. I did it because they used his name and his signature and his last months on earth to build a lie. He deserved better than that. She nodded once and didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. My mother-in-law was formally charged 6 weeks after I walked out of her living room. Elder financial abuse. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Filing a false report. Her son received a plea agreement in exchange for his testimony and cooperation with the forensic audit. He lost his position at the financial advisory firm where he had worked for 8 years, effective immediately upon the charges being made public. Sophie's father's estate went through probate under the original will, the one he had always intended, the one that reflected what he actually wanted. Sophie received her full inheritance. It was not a windfall. It was a modest house in a suburb she grew up in, a retirement account he had built carefully over decades, and a collection of first edition books he had loved since his 20s. She spent an entire Saturday afternoon sitting on the floor of his study going through them one by one. I sat in the doorway and watched her. She held up a worn copy of something, an old novel with a cracked spine. He always told me this one changed how he thought about people, she said. I didn't ask which part. I just watched her read the first page and smile for the first time in weeks. The sentencing came 4 months later. I was not present. Sophie was not present. We had agreed we did not need to be in the room for that. We had said everything that needed to be said through evidence and legal process. We were not interested in watching. We were in Colorado when the verdict notification came through on my phone. We had finally taken the trip we had postponed 3 times in the past year. Sophie was standing at the edge of a trail looking at the mountains. The light was hitting everything sideways in the late afternoon the way it does in high elevation, warm and unhurried. I read the notification. Convicted on 2 of 3 counts. 18 months plus supervised release. Restitution ordered. My brother-in-law's plea agreement held. I put my phone back in my pocket. Sophie turned around. Was that it? Yes. She looked at me for a moment, and then back at the mountains. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about it genuinely. Like it's over, I said. Like we can stop carrying it. She nodded. Good. We stood there for a while. Neither of us felt the need to celebrate. The mountain range doesn't care about your family's legal proceedings, and there was something clarifying about that. We had spent months inside something ugly and small. Standing in that much open space was its own kind of answer. That evening we had dinner at a place Sophie had found in a town we'd never been to before. Small room, wood tables, a menu that changed with whatever they had that week. We split a bottle of wine and talked about things that had nothing to do with any of it. A documentary she wanted to watch. A neighborhood we had been thinking about moving to. Whether we wanted to get a dog. It was the most ordinary dinner we had eaten in months, and it was the best one I could remember. Walking back to the hotel, Sophie stopped on a quiet street and looked up at the sky. There were more stars than you ever see in a city. She thought I would just accept it, Sophie said. That I would be too grieving and too overwhelmed to look at anything closely. She underestimated how well your father raised you, I said. Sophie was quiet for a moment. He trusted people, she said. He always said that was the better way to live, even if it cost you sometimes. I used to think it was naive. Now I think he just understood something I didn't yet. What's that? That you can trust people and still know exactly who they are, she said. The two things aren't in conflict. I thought about that the whole way home. There is a version of this story I could tell where the point is the collapse of her family, where the satisfaction lives in each charge filed and each conviction handed down. I understand why that version is compelling, but that is not the version I carry. What I carry is Sophie on the floor of her father's study, holding a book he loved. The specific, irreplaceable quality of her sitting there, recovering something that had been taken from her, reclaiming not just an inheritance but the right to grieve without a lie sitting on top of it. That is the version that was worth fighting for. Not the punishment. The truth underneath it. We came home from Colorado on a Sunday afternoon. Sophie spent the evening unpacking and reorganizing her father's books onto the shelves in our second bedroom, the one we had already started talking about repainting. I made dinner and listened to her move things around in there, the quiet shuffling of boxes, the occasional pause when she stopped to read something. At some point she came to the kitchen doorway and leaned against the frame. Thank you, she said. I looked up. I know you said you didn't do it for me, she added. But you did. I did, I agreed. She smiled. Okay. And she went back to her books. I don't think about my mother-in-law very often. When I do, it is not with anger. It is with something closer to incomprehension. She had a daughter who loved her father completely and openly and without agenda, and she looked at that love and saw a threat. She built an entire architecture of fraud around a dying man's final wishes because she could not tolerate being in a room where she was not the one controlling the outcome. I could not have stopped her from being that person. I could only make sure that version of events didn't stand. It didn't. And in the end, everything she built to take something from Sophie gave Sophie something she never would have had otherwise. A reason to look closely. A paper trail that proved, in federal record, exactly how much her father had trusted her, how consistently, how deliberately, and how right he had been to do it. Some people leave you a legacy of accomplishment. Some leave you money, property, titles. Sophie's father left her something quieter than all of that. He left her the record of a man who knew his daughter and refused to let anyone rewrite who she was. That record is permanent now. Sealed in court documents, my mother-in-law filed in her own name, trying to bury it. The greatest irony of what she did is that she's the one who made it undeniable.